Chapter 13 The Three Pirates. Tom now felt hopeless again. He felt that no one cared about him anymore. He didn't want to be a bad boy. It's just that people gave him no choice. How can someone be good without love? So Tom decided that it wasn't his fault that he was the way he was. It was everyone else's fault. He left the village, imagining that he would never return. After walking quite a long way, he found his good friend, Joe Harper. Joe seemed to be feeling pretty terrible himself. When Tom told him that he was planning on traveling the world, looking for new and exciting adventures, Joe said that he had had the same idea. He was angry because his mother had hit him for no reason. He didn't feel that she loved him or wanted him any more, so he ran away. The boys decided that since they had both lost their families, they would have to be a family now. Just the two of them, Tom and Joe, friends and brothers forever. So, now they had to plan what they would do next. After a few moments, they agreed to become pirates. Near the village, at the widest part of the Mississippi River, was a small island about 1 mile wide. Tom and Joe decided to make this their new home. It was totally empty of people and there were lots of trees, so no one would be able to see them from the shore. It was the perfect secret hiding place for pirates. While looking at the island, they met Huckleberry Finn. He didn't have family either, so they asked him if he'd like to become a pirate too. He very happily agreed to join them. They planned to meet at 12 o'clock that night and take a small boat over to the island. This way, no one could see them going there. They were all to bring food and any other useful supplies to help them live on the island. Tom brought some meat, a compass, and his knife with him that evening. He waited for his friends up on a hill above the river. It was a very quiet night, so he started to whistle. Then he heard someone whistle the same song somewhere down the hill. Tom tried whistling again, and someone said,
"Hey, who's that?" "I'm Tom Sawyer, the famous black pirate. And who am I talking to?" "Huck Finn, the red-handed, and Joe Harper, the destroyer of the seas."
These were all names that Tom had found in one of his favorite books.
"Do you know the secret word?" "Blood." "Okay, wait for me. I'm coming down,"
Tom said as he started walking down the hill. Once they were together, they looked at what everyone had brought. Joe had some meat with him, and Huck had brought his tobacco. Seeming happy with this, the black pirate said,
"Okay, men. Now we need something to build a fire with."
They decided to steal some firewood from one of the river boats. This would be pretty easy to do now that most of the workers were in the village. But just in case someone had stayed behind to guard the boat, they were very careful when they went aboard. Once they had the firewood, the pirates then found the little boat that would take them to their island. Tom stood at the front of the boat and gave orders to the other boys.
"Okay, let's go faster now." "All right. A little to the right. Wait. No, a little to the left. Watch out for those rocks up ahead."
At one point, they could see the village they had left forever. Tom was happy to be leaving it, and everyone he ever knew. He thought about his aunt and Becky, and he wished they could see him now, being so brave. A couple of hours later, they landed on the shore of the island. The first thing they did was hide their boat and find a place to keep their food safe from the animals. They decided not to build a shelter for themselves as they liked the idea of sleeping outside like real pirates. Later that evening, after dinner, they relaxed around a fire. Huck thought this was the perfect opportunity to smoke, so he took out his tobacco and started rolling a cigarette. The other two pirates watched him and wished that they knew how to smoke, and then they could really be like pirates. Huck lay back and began to smoke. After a couple of minutes of silence, he asked,
"So, what exactly do pirates do?"
Tom was the first to answer.
"Well, Huck, they steal treasure from ships and kill the sailors, except for the women. They don't kill women. They steal them along with the treasure if they're pretty. And they wear beautiful clothing from all over the world,"
said Joe. Huck looked at his own clothes.
"My clothing's not very beautiful,"
he said.
"Where can I get some better ones?" "Don't worry, Huck. We'll have plenty of opportunities to find new clothes once we start to travel."
Soon they all became tired, but the only person to really sleep was Huckleberry. The other two pirates were feeling a little guilty about having stolen the meat, the boat, and the firewood. They agreed never to take anything of anybody else's in the future. Chapter 14. Life on the Island. When Tom woke up, he didn't recognize where he was. It took him a few seconds to remember that he and his friends had run away. It was nice waking up outside, among the trees and the animals. Tom could hear the birds, both far and near, talking to each other. One bird, a blue jay, landed on a tree branch near the boys and looked at them curiously. It seemed as though this were the first time it had ever seen human beings before. At the same time, Tom noticed how similar animals and insects were to human beings. Some were busy working, some were eating, and some were playing. This made Tom want to play, so he woke the other boys and they all ran into the river to swim and clean themselves up for the day. While they were playing, they noticed that the river had carried away their boat. But this didn't bother any of them. They had everything they needed. They built another fire, and then Tom and Huck went fishing. Joe was the cook, so he just rested until they returned with the fish. After breakfast, they all rested around the fire, and it was agreed that this had been the best breakfast they'd ever eaten. Once their energy had returned, they wandered around the island for a while and then played some more in the river. At lunchtime, Joe cooked up some meat for everyone, and they sat around the fire talking for a while. They were happy all morning, but once they sat down to rest and the talking stopped, they started to feel differently. They began to think of their homes, and this made them feel a little sad and lonely. But they didn't talk about these feelings with each other, for fear that they'd be laughed at. Then there suddenly came a loud noise from the direction of the village. They all jumped up and ran to the edge of the island to see what it might have been. On their way to the shore, they heard the loud noise again. Through the trees, they could see a riverboat full of people. It was the boat that people used to cross the river every day. But it wasn't being used for that purpose now. It wasn't crossing the river. It was going down the river.
"Hey, I think they're looking for someone who's drowned. They're shooting that big gun to try and get the body to rise to the top of the water, just like they did last year when they found Bill Turner's body,"
shouted Huckleberry.
You're right, Huck. But I think we're the ones they believe to be drowned,
said Tom. Suddenly, the three boys started to feel great. The village must be terribly sad. Just to see all of those people looking for them on the boat, it made them realize how important they were to their village. All of those sad feelings they'd had a few minutes ago were now forgotten. It was great being a pirate again. When night came, the boats went back to the village, and the boys went back to their fire. They all agreed that this had been a great day. It felt good to be missed. They wondered what the people of the village might be saying about them right now. They talked and laughed a lot, thinking about this. But soon their laughter died down and they began to think about how this probably wasn't very funny for the people in the village, especially for their families. Then Joe looked up from the fire and said,
Maybe we should think about going back. Don't be silly, Joe,
Tom said, laughing.
Yeah, don't be silly,
Huck repeated. Soon both Joe and Huckleberry were sleeping. Tom, however, had other plans. He left a note for both of them, putting one in Joe's hat and the other in his pocket, so he'd find it easily, and then he ran toward the river. Chapter 15. Tom secretly visits home. Earlier that day, Tom had found where the river had carried their boat. It wasn't too far down from where they were staying. It was a little hard to find it this evening, due to the darkness, but now he was pulling it out into the river. As soon as the water started to carry the boat without his help, Tom jumped inside. He let the water take him toward the big river boat that had been looking for them earlier. Once he arrived, he quietly tied his boat to a tree near the shore and then climbed up a rope hanging from the big river boat. As soon as he was on the top floor, he heard the bell ring, indicating that the boat was now heading one last time for his village. He hid in the little boat hanging from the side of the large one, and when the river boat arrived at the village 12 minutes later, Tom climbed back down the rope into the water and swam to the shore. Within minutes, he was back in his aunt's garden, looking through the window into a room where people seemed to be talking. Inside were his Aunt Polly, his brother Sid, Mary, and Joe Harper's mother. They were all talking, but Tom couldn't hear them very clearly, so he went quietly to the front door and entered the house. He was crawling on his hands and knees. I suddenly feel a little cool. Did someone forget to close the front door? Asked Aunt Polly. Sid, be a good boy and go and close the door. Hearing Sid coming closer, Tom quickly hid under the table near the door. Luckily, Sid didn't see him. I know I yelled at Tom a lot, Tom heard his aunt saying, but he wasn't really a bad child. He just had a lot of energy, like any young child. I don't think he tried to be bad. In fact, I don't know a sweeter boy in the whole world than Tom. And my son Joe was no different. He was always a good boy, too. I was too hard on him. I wish I'd been more kind. Now I'll never get to tell him I'm sorry, cried Joe's mother. Tom could hear his aunt start to cry. I feel so terrible. Just yesterday I yelled at Tom for something he did to the cat. Tom felt tears coming to his eyes as Aunt Polly told this story to Joe's mother. Everyone in the house was crying now. He was surprised to hear how good a boy he'd been. He wanted to run into the room and give his aunt a big hug. But he stayed where he was and listened some more. It seemed that one of Joe's hats had been found a few miles down the river, so the whole village assumed they'd drowned. There was going to be a prayer service for the boys in church on Sunday. After Joe's mother had left, and Sid and Mary had gone to bed, Tom could hear his aunt praying for him. He loved her more than ever at this moment, because he now knew how much she loved him. He cried again as he listened to her, and she prayed herself to sleep. When he was sure she was sleeping, he carefully walked into her room and looked at her for a while. He felt guilty and wanted to make her feel better. He thought about leaving a note for her so she would find it when she woke up the next day. But then he changed his mind. An idea had suddenly come to him. He kissed his aunt and then started back for the river. He found another small boat tied to the shore and got into it. He took it across the river, close enough so that he could swim to the island. He had wanted to keep the boat, but he realized that people would look for it the following day, so he left it on the shore, hoping they'd think that it just came untied and drifted across the river by itself. He then swam to the island. By the time he arrived, the sun had begun to rise. He walked through the trees for a while until he could hear the boys talking. He heard Joe say to Huckleberry,
"Don't worry, Tom will be back. He wouldn't just forget about us."
Then Tom surprised them by coming from behind a tree and saying,
"That's right, Joe. I could never forget my fellow pirates."
They all made breakfast, and as they ate, Tom told them what he'd seen and heard.